Last Tuesday changed everything when I accidentally discovered my mother's will while helping her organize important documents. The shock hit me like a freight train as I read every devastating detail. The family home worth $400,000, her savings account with $60,000. Even the antique furniture collection passed down from my grandmother, all left to my younger brother Tyler. Nothing for me, despite being the one sending her $800 monthly for 3 years to cover her expenses. That document felt like a slap across my face. Staring at that, will memories flooded back of a lifetime spent watching Tyler receive everything while I got scraps. Growing up in our modest suburban home in Ohio, the favoritism wasn't subtle. When we were kids, Tyler always got the newest bicycle with racing stripes and multiple gears, while I inherited his beat-up hand-me-downs with wobbly wheels and rust spots. Christmas mornings were particularly painful. Tyler's pile of presents towered over mine like a mountain next to a molehill. The pattern continued through high school and college. Mom paid Tyler's full tuition at State University, covering his dorm fees, meal plans, and even spending money for weekend parties. Meanwhile, I worked 3 different jobs: dishwasher at Romano's Italian restaurant, stock clerk at Murphy's hardware store, and weekend landscaping crew just to afford community college classes. Every semester, I'd count crumpled dollar bills and pocket change, hoping I had enough for textbooks. Even Tyler's wedding 5 years ago showcased the disparity. Mom spent $12,000 on his reception at the Riverside Country Club, hiring a professional photographer, live band, and gourmet catering service. She bought his bride, Sarah, a diamond bracelet as a welcome gift, and paid for their honeymoon cruise to the Caribbean. When I married my wife, Jennifer, 2 years later, Mom contributed exactly $200 and complained about the expense. Jennifer and I held our reception in her parents' backyard with homemade decorations and a playlist from my laptop. Tyler's pattern of irresponsibility never seemed to matter to Mom. After college, he quit his first job at an insurance company after 6 months, claiming his boss was too demanding. His second position at a marketing firm lasted 8 months before he decided corporate life wasn't authentic enough for his creative spirit. Job number 3 ended when he stopped showing up because the commute was draining his energy. Each time he quit, Mom welcomed him back home with open arms and a fully stocked refrigerator. Currently, at 29 years old, Tyler was on his 4th career change in 2 years. Last month, he'd announced he was leaving his sales position at an electronics store to start an organic smoothie business. Mom praised his entrepreneurial spirit and courage to follow his dreams, while I watched her worried expression when she thought nobody was looking. She'd been supplementing his income for years, always finding excuses for why he needed extra help. Meanwhile, my recent promotion to senior accountant at Harrison and Associates barely registered on her radar. When I'd called to share the news about my salary increase and new responsibilities overseeing client portfolios, she'd responded with a distracted, "That's nice, honey," before launching into a 20-minute story about Tyler's latest business idea. The conversation stung, but I'd grown accustomed to playing second fiddle. Tyler's visits to Mom followed a predictable routine. He'd arrive every few weeks, usually around dinner time, bearing small gifts like gas station flowers or discount store chocolates. He'd charm her with stories about his latest ventures, painting himself as a misunderstood visionary, struggling against an unfair world. Within an hour, he'd casually mention needing help with rent car payments or some unexpected expense. Mom would disappear into her bedroom and return with cash or a hastily written check. These visits contrasted sharply with my weekly phone calls and monthly in-person visits, where I'd handle her banking, grocery shopping, and household maintenance. I'd installed her new washing machine, fixed her leaky kitchen faucet, and spent countless weekends trimming her hedges and cleaning her gutters. Tyler never lifted a finger during his visits, preferring to lounge on the couch while Mom prepared his favorite meals. The will discovery made these memories sting with fresh intensity. All those years of responsible behavior, financial support, and genuine care meant nothing compared to Tyler's charm and manipulation. Mom saw him as her successful boy, despite his string of failures while viewing me as the stable one who didn't need recognition or reward. But as I sat in Mom's living room that Tuesday afternoon, still reeling from the will's contents, something else caught my attention. Her cell phone buzzed with a text message, and she'd asked me to check it since she struggled with the small screen. What I found there changed everything I thought I knew about the situation. The message was from Tyler, sent just 2 hours earlier. Can't believe Jimmy is still throwing money around trying to control you. Hope you remember who really cares when you update those legal papers. Some people think they can buy love, but you're smarter than that, Mom. My hands trembled as I scrolled through weeks of similar messages. Tyler had been systematically poisoning our mother against me, painting my financial support as manipulation and control. He'd positioned himself as the protective son, defending her independence while casting me as the villain, attempting to buy her affection. Each message was carefully crafted to reinforce his narrative, while undermining my genuine efforts to help. One particularly cruel text read, "Jimmy probably tells Jennifer how much of a burden you are. Good thing you have one son who doesn't see you as an obligation." Another said, "Don't let him guilt you into feeling bad for accepting help. You deserve to be treated with respect, not like some charity case he can lord over." The twisted genius of Tyler's strategy became crystal clear. He'd convinced Mom that my financial support came with strings attached, while presenting his own requests for money as her choice to help a struggling son. In her mind, I was the manipulative one trying to buy control, while Tyler was the grateful recipient of her generous maternal love. The text messages were just the beginning. Something deeper was wrong with Mom's finances, and I decided to investigate before confronting anyone. Over the next few days, I carefully reviewed the documents she'd asked me to help organize, looking for clues about where my monthly $800 contributions had been going. What I discovered made my stomach churn. Mom's mortgage payments were 3 months behind, despite my regular financial support. The overdue notices were buried beneath stacks of catalogs, and junk mail suggesting she'd been hiding them deliberately. Late fees had accumulated to over $600, and the bank had sent multiple warnings about potential foreclosure proceedings. Her credit card statements revealed even more disturbing news. 3 different cards showed balances totaling nearly $15,000 with minimum payments she couldn't afford on her fixed Social Security income. The charges weren't for necessities like groceries or utilities. They were cash advances and balance transfers indicating she'd been borrowing against credit to obtain actual money for some purpose. Property tax records showed another crisis brewing. Mom hadn't paid her annual property taxes in 18 months, accumulating penalties and interest that now exceeded $4,000. The county assessor's office had sent several notices threatening tax lien procedures, which could ultimately result in losing the house she'd willed to Tyler. None of these financial emergencies made sense given my monthly contributions. $800 should have covered her mortgage payment, with money left over for utilities and groceries. Something was draining her finances faster than I could replenish them, and I had a growing suspicion about the culprit. My investigation led me to Mom's neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived next door for 15 years and maintained a friendly relationship with our family. She was watering her flower garden when I approached, and her expression grew concerned when I explained my worries about Mom's financial situation. "Oh, honey, I've been wondering when someone would notice," Mrs. Patterson said, setting down her watering can and glancing toward Mom's house. "I didn't want to interfere in family business, but I've seen things that worried me." She explained that Tyler had been visiting much more frequently than I'd realized, not the occasional social calls I knew about, but weekly trips that lasted several hours. Each visit followed the same pattern. Tyler would arrive looking agitated, engage in what sounded like heated discussions through the thin walls, then leave carrying envelopes or small packages. Last month, I heard raised voices and saw Tyler storm out to his car. Mrs. Patterson continued. "About an hour later, your mother came outside looking upset. When I asked if everything was okay, she said Tyler was going through a rough patch and needed extra support from family." More disturbing was Mrs. Patterson's account of a recent incident where she'd witnessed Tyler arguing with Mom on the front porch. She couldn't hear the specific words, but Tyler's body language was aggressive and demanding. He'd pointed his finger at Mom repeatedly, while she shook her head and appeared to be crying. The argument ended when Mom went inside and returned with what looked like a check or cash payment. "I've never seen your mother look so distressed," Mrs. Patterson admitted. Tyler drove away without even saying goodbye, and she stood on that porch, looking defeated for the longest time. It broke my heart, but I didn't know how to help without overstepping boundaries. Armed with this new information, I decided to take a closer look at Mom's banking records. As her emergency contact and someone who helped her with financial paperwork, I had legitimate access to review her account statements. What I found confirmed my worst fears and revealed the scope of Tyler's financial abuse. The pattern was unmistakable once I knew what to look for. Regular withdrawals of varying amounts, sometimes $200, other times $500, or even $800, corresponded with Tyler's visits, as documented by Mrs. Patterson's observations. Mom had been giving him money far beyond what I was contributing, draining her savings account and maxing out credit cards to fund his endless schemes. The paper trail showed Tyler's lies in stark detail. He'd claimed his organic smoothie business needed $1,500 for initial inventory, but the timing coincided with his purchase of a motorcycle I'd seen him riding around town. A supposed investment opportunity in cryptocurrency had required $2,000, but online records showed he'd spent that week gambling at the local riverboat casino. His most recent request for emergency car repairs had actually funded a weekend trip to Las Vegas, with friends documented through his own social media posts. Mom had been systematically deceived, but her willingness to believe Tyler's stories suggested she wanted to help him succeed, regardless of the cost. Each time he claimed a business venture would make him financially independent and able to repay her generous loans, she'd found new ways to generate money for his schemes. But the most shocking discovery was still ahead. Hidden in a folder marked legal documents, I found papers that made my blood run cold. Tyler hadn't just been taking money from Mom. He'd been forging her signature on loan applications, using her house as collateral for his personal debts. The documents showed a pending personal loan for $30,000 in Mom's name, complete with her forged signature and fabricated income information. Tyler had listed himself as her caregiver and power of attorney, neither of which was legally true. The loan approval was contingent on final verification of her assets, meaning he was days away from completing a massive fraud that would put Mom's house at risk of foreclosure. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Tyler wasn't just irresponsible or manipulative. He was actively committing financial crimes against our mother while positioning himself as her devoted son. Every dollar I'd been sending to help her had essentially been funding Tyler's fraud, while she accumulated debts and faced potential homelessness. I couldn't wait any longer to confront Mom with the evidence. The $30,000 loan fraud was scheduled for final approval within days, and she needed to understand the danger Tyler had created. I arrived at her house the next morning with copies of all the financial documents, bank statements, and forged loan papers, expecting she'd be grateful I'd uncovered Tyler's schemes before they destroyed her financially. Instead, the conversation became a nightmare of denial and misplaced loyalty. "Jimmy, I can't believe you've been snooping through my private papers," Mom said, her voice sharp with accusation rather than appreciation. "You had no right to investigate my finances, like some kind of detective. This feels like an invasion of privacy." I spread the evidence across her kitchen table, pointing to the forged signatures and fraudulent loan applications. "Mom, look at these documents. Tyler has been stealing from you and committing fraud using your identity. This isn't about privacy. It's about protecting you from financial ruin." But Mom pushed the papers away without examining them closely. "Tyler explained everything to me already. He said you might try to cause trouble because you're jealous of our close relationship. The loan is for a legitimate business opportunity that will pay back double within 6 months. He's trying to build a future for himself instead of depending on handouts." The irony of her statement was staggering. Tyler had convinced her that his fraudulent loans were independence, while my legitimate financial support was manipulation. He'd twisted reality so thoroughly that she viewed his crimes as virtues while seeing my help as something sinister. As our argument escalated, Mom revealed the depth of Tyler's psychological manipulation campaign. For months, he'd been feeding her carefully crafted lies about my motivations and character, painting a picture of a controlling older brother who used money to dominate family relationships. Tyler told me you complained to Jennifer about having to support me. Mom said, her eyes filling with tears. He said you call me a burden and talk about how much easier your life would be if you didn't have to worry about your needy mother. Is that how you really feel? The accusation cut deep because it was completely false. Jennifer and I had never spoken negatively about Mom, and I'd always considered helping her a privilege rather than an obligation. But Tyler had created a narrative where my financial support came with resentment and judgment, making Mom feel guilty for accepting help she genuinely needed. He also warned me that you've been planning to put me in a nursing home so you can inherit my house, she continued. Tyler said you've been researching assisted living facilities and discussing how to get power of attorney over my decisions. He's been protecting me from your schemes, not creating problems. Each revelation showed Tyler's sophisticated understanding of Mom's deepest fears. He'd exploited her anxiety about losing independence, her worry about being a burden on her children, and her desire to maintain dignity in her golden years. By positioning himself as her protector against these imagined threats, he'd earned her absolute trust while systematically destroying her financial security. Mom then dropped the bombshell that explained why she'd changed her will in Tyler's favor. Tyler suggested I update my estate planning because you don't really need the inheritance anyway with your good job and stable marriage. He pointed out that he struggles financially and deserves a fresh start while you've already achieved success. He said you'd understand because you've always been the responsible one who doesn't need help. The twisted logic was brilliant in its simplicity. Tyler had reframed Mom's favoritism as fairness, suggesting that giving everything to the struggling son while ignoring the successful one was actually equitable treatment. He'd convinced her that rewarding his failures while punishing my achievements was the compassionate choice. But the most devastating part of Tyler's manipulation was still to come. Mom disappeared into her bedroom and returned carrying her cell phone with a triumphant expression, as if she was about to prove Tyler's claims beyond doubt. Tyler has been recording our conversations because he was worried about you taking advantage of me, she announced, scrolling through audio files on her phone. He wanted to protect me by documenting evidence of your controlling behavior. Listen to this and tell me it doesn't sound manipulative. She played several audio clips that made me sound dismissive, impatient, and condescending during our phone conversations. In one clip, I appeared to be lecturing her about making better financial decisions, while she responded with hurt silence. Another recording captured me, seemingly criticizing her for always needing help with something. The audio evidence seemed damning until I realized what Tyler had done. These weren't complete conversations, they were carefully edited segments, where he'd spliced together fragments of different discussions to create false narratives. My voice was real, but the context had been completely manipulated to make normal conversations sound cruel and controlling. In reality, those lectures about financial decisions had been gentle suggestions about budgeting during conversations where Mom had asked for advice. The comments about always needing help had been made during a completely different discussion about Tyler's job situation, not about Mom at all. Tyler had spent months collecting these audio fragments and editing them into evidence of psychological abuse that never happened. The sophistication of his manipulation was breathtaking. He'd created manufactured evidence to support his narrative while exploiting Mom's limited understanding of audio editing technology. She believed the recordings were genuine proof of my mistreatment because she trusted Tyler's technical abilities and didn't understand how easily audio could be manipulated. Standing in Mom's kitchen, surrounded by evidence of Tyler's crimes, and facing her absolute refusal to see the truth, I realized that logic and documentation weren't enough to overcome months of systematic psychological manipulation. Tyler had constructed a reality where he was the hero and I was the villain, complete with falsified evidence and emotional testimony that felt more real to Mom than objective facts. The most painful part was recognizing that Mom wanted to believe Tyler's version of events. His narrative allowed her to see herself as a wise mother protecting her vulnerable son from his jealous brother, rather than as an elderly woman being systematically defrauded by a manipulative child. Tyler's lies were more comfortable than the truth because they preserved her dignity and sense of agency. Realizing that Mom was too deeply invested in Tyler's lies to accept the truth, I made the hardest decision of my life. Standing in her kitchen that morning, surrounded by evidence she refused to acknowledge, I announced that I was stopping all financial support immediately. If you choose to believe Tyler's version of events over documented proof of his fraud, then you're choosing to face the consequences without my help. I told her, my voice steady, despite the emotional turmoil inside. I won't continue enabling his theft by providing money he can steal, while you convince yourself he's protecting you from me. The transformation in Mom's demeanor was instant and terrifying. Her defensive anger dissolved into pure panic as the reality of losing my financial support hit home. She grabbed my arm with shaking hands, her eyes wide with fear I'd never seen before. "Jimmy, you can't just abandon me like this," she pleaded. "I know we disagree about Tyler, but cutting off support entirely, that's cruel and vindictive. I need that money to survive, and you know it." But then she revealed the secret she'd been hiding that explained her desperation to believe in Tyler's business schemes. With tears streaming down her face, she admitted she'd been diagnosed with early-stage diabetes and high blood pressure 6 months earlier. The medical conditions required expensive medications that weren't fully covered by her Medicare plan, plus regular doctor visits and blood work that strained her fixed income. The prescriptions cost me $400 every month. She confessed, collapsing into a kitchen chair, as if the weight of secrecy had been exhausting her. The blood pressure medication alone is $150, and the diabetes supplies add another $250. I've been rationing pills to make them last longer, but I know that's dangerous. The health revelation explains so much about her recent behavior and desperate financial situation. She hadn't told me about the diagnoses, because Tyler had convinced her I would use her medical needs as justification to take control of her finances and force her into assisted living care. Tyler said you'd see the diabetes as proof I can't take care of myself anymore. She continued through her tears. He warned me that children often use their parents' health problems as excuses to strip away their independence and make decisions for them. I was terrified you'd try to get power of attorney and put me in one of those horrible nursing homes. Tyler's manipulation had been even more cruel than I'd realized. He'd exploited her medical fears and her desire to maintain dignity in her declining years, convincing her that hiding serious health conditions was preferable to risking my supposed controlling intervention. Meanwhile, he'd positioned himself as her only ally in maintaining independence, while secretly planning to defraud her of everything she owned. The irony was devastating. Mom had been hiding health problems that required exactly the kind of support I'd been providing, while Tyler used her fears about medical dependency to justify his escalating financial demands. She'd been caught between needing help and fearing the loss of autonomy, making her vulnerable to Tyler's promises of magical business solutions that would solve everything. I wanted to believe Tyler's smoothie business would succeed because I needed it to work, she admitted. If he could make enough money to help support me, then I wouldn't have to depend on you or risk losing my independence. His other business ideas failed, but I kept hoping the next one would be different because I was running out of options. This revelation explained her willingness to deplete savings and max out credit cards for Tyler's schemes. She wasn't just being manipulated by a charming son, she was making desperate gambles with her financial security because she felt trapped between medical needs she couldn't afford and independence she couldn't bear to lose. But even faced with the reality of her health situation and financial desperation, Mom struggled to accept responsibility for enabling Tyler's behavior. She continued to frame his fraud as poor judgment, rather than deliberate theft, and his manipulation as overprotectiveness, rather than psychological abuse. Maybe Tyler made some mistakes with the loan paperwork, but his heart was in the right place. She said, still defending him, even as her own situation crumbled. He was trying to help me avoid becoming a burden on you. And that's more than I can say for some children who see their parents as obligations. The comment stung, because it showed how completely Tyler had twisted her perception of our family dynamics. She genuinely believed that Tyler's crimes were motivated by love, while my legitimate support was motivated by duty or obligation. He'd convinced her that stealing from her was noble, while helping her was selfish. Standing in that kitchen, watching Mom choose Tyler's lies over my documented truth, I felt something inside me break permanently. I couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved, and I couldn't continue sacrificing my own family's financial security to fund Tyler's fraud while being painted as the villain in the process. "I'm done, Mom," I said quietly, pulling my car keys from my pocket. "I won't enable this anymore. When you're ready to face the truth about Tyler and work together on real solutions, you know how to reach me. Until then, you'll have to figure this out without my help." I walked toward the door as she called after me with increasingly desperate pleas, but I didn't turn around. In my car, I sent one final text message, explaining that I wouldn't respond to future contact until she was ready to acknowledge Tyler's fraud and work together on legitimate solutions rather than magical thinking and manufactured conspiracies. Then, I blocked her number and drove home to begin the painful process of accepting that I might never have a relationship with my mother again. The guilt was crushing, but the relief was equally powerful. For the first time in years, I wouldn't be constantly worried about Mom's financial crisis or Tyler's latest scheme. The weight of responsibility I'd carried for so long was finally lifted, even though the cost was losing my family. 3 days later, everything changed when Tyler's carefully constructed house of lies began collapsing around him. The first crack in Tyler's facade appeared when Mom received a phone call that shattered her remaining illusions about his business ventures. A man named Robert Chen identified himself as Tyler's business partner and demanded immediate repayment of the $30,000 Tyler had borrowed for their joint investment opportunity. "Mrs. Thompson, your son, assured me this was a short-term loan with guaranteed returns within 30 days. Robert's voice was cold and professional when Mom put him on speakerphone, hoping to resolve what she assumed was a misunderstanding. "It's been 6 weeks now, and Tyler isn't returning my calls. I need that money back immediately, plus the agreed-upon interest." But as Robert continued talking, Mom realized Tyler's latest scheme was far worse than failed business optimism. There had never been a legitimate business partnership. Tyler had crafted an elaborate story about an import opportunity involving electronics from overseas, complete with fake contracts and forged documents. He'd convinced Robert to invest $30,000 by using Mom's house and financial information as collateral, promising doubled returns within a month. "I have copies of all the paperwork Tyler provided, including financial statements showing your house as security for the investment," Robert continued. "According to these documents, you're a co-signer on this loan and legally responsible for repayment if Tyler defaults. I've been patient, but my lawyer says I can pursue foreclosure proceedings against your property if the money isn't returned within 10 days. Mom's hands shook as she realized Tyler had forged her signature on loan documents, exactly as I'd tried to warn her about. But instead of the personal loan application, I'd discovered he'd created an even more complex fraud, involving a fictitious business partnership and fake investment opportunity. The house she'd willed to Tyler was now collateral for a debt she'd never agreed to take on. Robert revealed that Tyler had disappeared entirely after collecting the loan money, cutting all contact when the promised returns failed to materialize. His phone number was disconnected, his apartment had been vacated, and his last known employer had fired him for stealing merchandise. Tyler hadn't just failed in another business venture, he'd committed fraud and fled to avoid facing the consequences. Your son ran a sophisticated con game, Robert explained with growing frustration. He provided fake bank statements, forged property deeds, and even created false identity documents to support his story. This wasn't poor business judgment. This was deliberate fraud planned over several months. After Robert hung up with promises to pursue legal action, Mom sat in stunned silence for several hours. The son she'd defended and enabled had betrayed her more completely than even I had suspected. Tyler hadn't just taken her money. He'd used her identity to commit crimes that threatened her home, her financial security, and potentially her freedom if authorities considered her complicit in his schemes. For the next month, I maintained complete no contact with Mom, while focusing on my own family's healing process. Jennifer supported my decision to establish boundaries, noting how much happier and relaxed I seemed without the constant stress of managing family crises. My sleep improved, my appetite returned, and I stopped checking my phone obsessively for emergency calls about Mom's latest financial disaster. But during this peaceful period, Mom's situation deteriorated rapidly without my monthly financial support. The mortgage payments I'd been covering fell further behind, accumulating additional late fees and penalty charges that pushed her closer to foreclosure proceedings. Utility companies sent disconnection warnings for electricity and natural gas services as bills remained unpaid. Medical appointments were postponed indefinitely because she couldn't afford co-payments for doctor visits or prescription refills. The combination of Tyler's fraud-mounting debts and loss of my financial support created a perfect storm of crisis that finally overwhelmed Mom's ability to maintain her illusions. Reality crashed down on her with devastating force, stripping away the comfortable lies Tyler had constructed and forcing her to confront the truth she'd been avoiding. When desperation finally drove her to swallow her pride and contact me, the conversation began exactly as I'd anticipated, from months of dealing with her misplaced priorities. My phone rang on a Tuesday evening, while Jennifer and I were preparing dinner for our kids, and Mom's voice came through the speaker with no greeting, no inquiry about my well-being, and no acknowledgement of our month-long silence. "Where's my money?" she demanded, as if I was a delinquent employee, rather than a son who'd been systematically maligned and pushed away. "It's the 15th of the month, and I haven't received my usual payment. My bills are overdue, and I need that money deposited immediately." The entitlement in her tone was breathtaking. After choosing Tyler's lies over my documented evidence, after defending his fraud, while attacking my character, after refusing to listen to reason or accept reality, she expected to pick up our financial relationship exactly where it had left off. There was no apology for the accusations, no acknowledgement of Tyler's crimes, and no recognition that her actions had consequences. "I explained this when I left your house a month ago," I replied calmly, setting down my dinner preparations to give the conversation my full attention. "I stopped the monthly payments when you chose to believe Tyler's lies, instead of documented evidence of his fraud. That decision hasn't changed." "This is ridiculous, Jimmy," she snapped, her voice rising with anger and panic. "You can't punish me for defending my son against your jealous accusations. Tyler made some mistakes, but that doesn't give you the right to abandon your responsibilities to your mother." The conversation continued in this vein for several minutes, with Mom alternating between demands, accusations, and threats. She blamed me for causing Tyler's stress, which supposedly led to his poor decision-making. She accused me of orchestrating his disappearance to prove my point about his character. She even suggested I was deliberately timing my withdrawal of support to maximize her suffering and force her to admit I'd been right all along. But then, in the middle of her angry tirade about my supposed cruelty and vindictiveness, I heard a sharp knock echoing through her phone. Mom's voice cut off mid-sentence, replaced by footsteps and the sound of a door opening. "Ma'am, I'm Deputy Williams with the County Sheriff's Office," a professional male voice announced clearly enough for me to hear through the phone. "I have documents regarding foreclosure proceedings for this property. Are you Dorothy Thompson, the legal owner of this residence?" The silence that followed was deafening. Through the phone, I could hear papers rustling, and Mom's sharp intake of breath as the reality of her situation crystallized in the most concrete way possible. The house she'd willed to Tyler was about to be repossessed by the bank, making her inheritance plans meaningless while leaving her homeless in her 72-year-old golden years. "I don't understand." Mom's voice trembled as she spoke to the deputy. "There must be some mistake. My son handles the financial arrangements for this property, and he assured me everything was current." According to these documents, mortgage payments are 4 months in arrears totaling $8,300, including penalties and fees. Deputy Williams replied with bureaucratic efficiency, "You have 30 days to bring the account current or vacate the premises. Failure to comply will result in forced eviction and additional legal consequences." Through the phone, I listened to Mom's world collapse in real time as she finally understood the scope of Tyler's betrayal and the consequences of rejecting my attempts to help her. The house she'd believed was secure enough to will to Tyler was slipping away, while Tyler himself had vanished with stolen money, leaving her to face the legal and financial wreckage alone. 2 days after the deputy's visit shattered Mom's remaining illusions, she called again, with a completely different tone. The demanding anger was gone, replaced by a quiet desperation that acknowledged how thoroughly her situation had deteriorated during our month of silence. "Jimmy, I need to talk to you." She began, her voice small and uncertain in a way I hadn't heard since my childhood. "I know you're angry with me, and maybe you have good reasons, but I'm scared, and I don't know what to do anymore. Could you please come over so we can figure this out together?" The change in her demeanor was striking, but I'd been hurt too deeply to trust that this represented genuine growth rather than temporary panic. Before agreeing to any meeting, I established clear conditions that would demonstrate her commitment to honesty and accountability. "I'll come talk to you, but only if you're ready to have a completely honest conversation about Tyler's behavior and your role in enabling it," I told her firmly. "No more defending his actions as mistakes or poor judgment. No more blaming me for his choices. If you want my help, you need to face the truth about what's been happening." She agreed immediately, which surprised me, given how fiercely she'd defended Tyler just weeks earlier. When I arrived at her house the next morning, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by financial documents, bank statements, and legal papers spread out like puzzle pieces she was trying to fit together. "I've been going through everything since the deputy left," she began without preamble, gesturing to the paperwork around her. "I wanted to understand how things got so bad so quickly, but the numbers don't make sense. Even without your monthly help, my Social Security should have covered basic expenses. Something else has been draining my accounts." Together, we systematically reviewed her financial records, and the pattern of Tyler's theft became undeniable, even to her willfully blind maternal instincts. Regular withdrawals corresponding to his visits, forged signatures on loan applications, and fabricated business documents painted a clear picture of systematic fraud, spanning nearly 2 years. But the breakthrough moment came when Mom finally allowed me to examine the audio recordings Tyler had used to convince her of my controlling behavior. She'd brought her phone to our meeting, still somewhat convinced that the edited conversations proved Tyler's claims about my psychological manipulation. "I want you to hear these for yourself," she said, scrolling through the audio files with shaking fingers. "Maybe you can explain why you sound so cruel in these recordings, because it doesn't match the son I remember raising." As we listened to the edited clips together, I was able to identify the specific conversations Tyler had manipulated and explain the missing context that changed everything. The recording where I seemed to lecture her about making better financial decisions had been spliced together from 3 different phone calls, removing her requests for advice and my gentle responses while keeping only fragments that sounded condescending. "Do you remember this conversation about your prescription costs?" I asked, pointing to one particularly damaging audio clip. "You'd called asking for suggestions about budgeting for your medications, and I'd offered to research patient assistance programs. Tyler edited out your questions and my helpful responses keeping only the parts where I mentioned the importance of careful financial planning. Mom listened with growing horror as I deconstructed each manipulated recording, showing how Tyler had spent months collecting innocent conversation fragments and reassembling them into evidence of abuse that never happened. Her technical inexperience had made her vulnerable to this sophisticated deception, but her desire to believe Tyler's narrative had prevented her from questioning the recording's authenticity. "He told me you'd probably claim the recordings were fake if confronted with them." She admitted, tears beginning to flow as the scope of Tyler's manipulation became clear. "He said manipulative people always try to discredit evidence against them, and that I should trust what I was hearing with my own ears, rather than your explanations." The systematic nature of Tyler's psychological campaign was breathtaking in its cruelty and effectiveness. He'd exploited her love, her fears, her technical limitations, and her desire to maintain family harmony to construct a false reality where his crimes were virtues and my help was manipulation. Every aspect of his strategy had been calculated to isolate her from genuine support, while maximizing her dependence on his fraudulent schemes. As our conversation continued, Mom began sharing details about Tyler's behavior that she'd previously dismissed or rationalized. She described how he'd become increasingly aggressive and demanding during his visits, threatening to cut contact entirely if she didn't provide larger amounts of money for his business ventures. "Last month, he told me that if I really loved him, I'd prove it by helping him succeed, instead of listening to your poison," she revealed, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "He said families were supposed to sacrifice for each other, and that my reluctance to give him more money showed I didn't believe in his abilities." She also admitted that Tyler had been stealing her prescription medications during his visits, claiming he was borrowing them for friends with similar health conditions who couldn't afford their own medications. The theft explained why her diabetes and blood pressure had been poorly controlled. Despite her doctor's treatment plan, she'd been taking reduced doses to compensate for Tyler's thefts, while blaming her worsening health on age and stress. "I knew something was wrong when my pill counts didn't match what they should have been," she confessed. "But Tyler always had reasonable explanations, and I wanted to believe he was helping people rather than selling my medications for drug money." The medical theft was particularly devastating because it had directly endangered her health while funding Tyler's gambling and substance abuse habits. She'd been rationing life-saving medications to cover for his thefts, creating a vicious cycle where her declining health made her more dependent on his promises of business success and financial salvation. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. While organizing Tyler's personal belongings that remained in his childhood bedroom, we found documents that revealed the true scope of his planning and premeditation. Hidden in a box beneath old school papers and sports trophies were detailed notes about Mom's financial accounts, copies of important documents, and even a forged power of attorney that would have given him complete control over her assets. "He's been planning this for over a year," I said, showing Mom the handwritten notes that outlined his step-by-step strategy for gaining control of her finances. "These aren't the actions of someone making impulsive mistakes. This is a systematic plan to defraud you of everything you own." The forged power of attorney was particularly chilling because it would have given Tyler legal authority to sell her house, access her bank accounts, and make medical decisions on her behalf. The document was professionally created with notarized signatures and legal language that would have fooled most institutions. Tyler had been just days away from implementing this final phase of his fraud, when Robert's demands for loan repayment forced him to flee instead. Looking at this evidence, Mom finally acknowledged the full extent of Tyler's betrayal and her own role in enabling his behavior. The son she'd protected and defended had been systematically destroying her life while positioning himself as her savior. Her willingness to believe his lies had nearly cost her everything, and only Tyler's own greed and impatience had prevented him from completing his scheme. "I've been such a fool," she whispered, staring at the forged power of attorney with horror and recognition. "He didn't love me. He was using me." Everything he said about you was projection. He was the one trying to control and manipulate me, and I helped him do it by pushing away the son who was actually trying to protect me. The transformation in Mom's attitude was genuine and complete, but I knew that words alone wouldn't be sufficient to rebuild trust after months of accusations and betrayal. Before committing to help her recover from Tyler's fraud, I needed concrete actions that demonstrated her understanding of what had happened and her commitment to preventing future manipulation. If you want my help moving forward, there are conditions that aren't negotiable, I explained during our kitchen table conversation. First, we contact the police to report Tyler's crimes. Second, we work with a lawyer to protect your assets and pursue recovery of stolen funds. Third, you attend counseling to understand how you became vulnerable to his manipulation. And fourth, we establish legal safeguards to prevent anyone from taking advantage of you again. Mom agreed to every condition without hesitation, recognizing that her previous resistance to outside intervention had made Tyler's crimes possible. Within 24 hours, we'd filed a police report detailing the financial fraud, identity theft, and forged documents. Detective Martinez with the County Fraud Unit was experienced in elder abuse cases and immediately understood the sophistication of Tyler's operation. Your brother ran a textbook financial abuse scheme, Detective Martinez explained as he reviewed our evidence. The forged power of attorney manipulated audio recordings and systematic isolation from family support are classic techniques used by predators who target elderly victims. The fact that he's a family member makes it more painful, but doesn't make it less criminal. The detective's investigation revealed that Tyler had fled to Nevada, where he'd been arrested on unrelated charges involving identity theft and check fraud targeting other victims. His pattern of behavior wasn't limited to family. He'd been running similar schemes against elderly people in multiple states, using the money to fund gambling addictions and drug purchases. Simultaneously, I hired Patricia Lawson, an elder law attorney who specialized in financial abuse recovery. Patricia immediately filed emergency motions to freeze any remaining assets Tyler might have accessed, and began the process of unwinding the fraudulent loan agreements he'd created using Mom's identity. The forged power of attorney is actually helpful evidence because it shows premeditation, Patricia explained during our first meeting. This wasn't impulsive behavior. It was a calculated plan to commit elder abuse. That will strengthen both the criminal case and our civil recovery efforts. Working with Patricia, we discovered that Tyler's crimes were even more extensive than we'd initially realized. He'd opened credit cards in Mom's name, taken out personal loans using her Social Security number, and even applied for government benefits by claiming to be her caregiver. The total fraudulent debt exceeded $50,000, but the documentation Patricia gathered would allow us to dispute most of these obligations as identity theft. More importantly, Patricia helped us implement legal protections to prevent future abuse. We established a revocable trust for Mom's assets, with me as successor trustee, created a legitimate power of attorney with specific limitations and oversight requirements, and set up banking alerts that would notify both of us about unusual account activity. Throughout this process, Mom demonstrated genuine commitment to understanding her own role in enabling Tyler's behavior. She began weekly counseling sessions with Dr. Susan Reynolds, a therapist who specialized in family manipulation and elder abuse recovery. These sessions helped her recognize the psychological techniques Tyler had used and develop healthier boundaries for future relationships. I realized I'd been so afraid of being alone that I was willing to ignore obvious red flags about Tyler's behavior, Mom explained after several weeks of therapy. Dr. Reynolds helped me understand that enabling destructive behavior isn't love, it's fear, disguised as care. The therapy also helped Mom process her grief over losing the son she'd thought Tyler was. His manipulation had created a false persona designed to exploit her maternal instincts, and accepting that this loving son had never really existed was as painful as dealing with the financial crimes. Meanwhile, the criminal case against Tyler progressed rapidly. He was extradited back to our state to face multiple felony charges, including elder abuse, financial fraud forgery, and identity theft. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, Tyler accepted a plea agreement that included 18 months in state prison and restitution payments to his victims. The plea hearing was the first time I'd seen Tyler since discovering his crimes, and the change in his appearance was shocking. The charming, confident manipulation he'd always projected was gone, replaced by a defeated stranger who couldn't meet our eyes as he admitted his guilt before the judge. "I want to apologize to my mother and brother for the pain I've caused," Tyler said during his allocution, though his words felt rehearsed and hollow rather than genuine. "I was struggling with addiction and mental health issues, and I made terrible choices that hurt the people who cared about me most." Mom chose not to speak at the sentencing hearing, explaining that she needed to focus on healing rather than reliving Tyler's betrayal. Her decision reflected the healthy boundaries she'd been developing in therapy and her commitment to breaking the cycle of enabling that had made his crimes possible. The financial recovery process was more successful than we'd initially hoped. Asset seizure allowed authorities to recover nearly $20,000 from Tyler's accounts and property, while the fraudulent debts were successfully disputed and removed from Mom's credit report. Insurance through her bank covered some of the losses, and the house was saved through a loan modification that reduced her monthly payments to affordable levels. With Tyler in prison and legal protections in place, Mom and I began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship on foundations of mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. She insisted on gradually repaying the money I'd spent on legal fees and home repairs, even though I didn't require it. Her gesture demonstrated her commitment to taking responsibility for her recovery, rather than expecting others to fix problems she'd helped create. 6 months after Tyler's sentencing, Mom was healthier and more independent than she'd been in years. Her diabetes and blood pressure were well controlled with proper medications and regular medical care. She'd developed genuine friendships with neighbors and other seniors at the community center, reducing her isolation and vulnerability to manipulation. Most importantly, she'd learned to value honest relationships over comfortable lies. Our conversations became deeper and more authentic as she practiced the communication skills she'd learned in therapy. She asked thoughtful questions about my work and family life, showing genuine interest rather than going through obligatory motions. Tyler served his full sentence and was released on supervised probation with requirements for addiction treatment and financial counseling. Mom chose to maintain no contact with him, recognizing that his problems needed professional intervention rather than family enabling. She'd learned that protecting herself from toxic behavior wasn't cruel. It was necessary self-care that sometimes motivated positive changes in others. The experience taught me that love doesn't always mean providing unlimited support without boundaries. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is allow someone to face the consequences of their choices while protecting yourself from becoming collateral damage. True family relationships require mutual respect, honesty, and accountability from all parties. Looking back, I'm grateful that Tyler's greed and impatience prevented him from completing his scheme to take everything Mom owned. His criminal behavior ultimately led to justice and healing that might never have occurred if his manipulation had continued successfully. Mom's willingness to face painful truths and commit to genuine change allowed us to build a stronger relationship than we'd ever had before. Today, Mom lives independently in her own home with appropriate support systems and legal protections. She's learned to trust her instincts about people's motivations and to ask for help when she needs it, rather than suffering in silence. Our monthly visits are filled with genuine conversation and shared activities, rather than financial crisis management and family drama. The life lesson that emerged from this ordeal is that protecting yourself from manipulation isn't selfish. It's necessary for maintaining healthy relationships with people who deserve your trust and care. Tyler's behavior taught us both that some people will exploit kindness if you let them, but that doesn't mean you should stop being kind to those who appreciate and reciprocate your efforts. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who were taking advantage of your generosity. Share your experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear how others have handled similar situations. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more real-life stories about family relationships and personal growth. Don't forget to share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of healthy boundaries in family relationships. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when it comes from people you care about deeply. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.